Hey class. So just doing a quick recording for our lecture from last Wednesday. I know we canceled class. I was traveling and internet um, was not very reliable and was unable to get connected into Zoom and into our classroom. So I'm just going to do a very brief, quick overview of what we would have discussed last Wednesday on the 18th. Um, we had discussed previously on Monday the symbolic frame, and we had been discussing some of the assumptions of the frame as well as some ways in which symbols tend to manifest in organizations. And at the heart of that symbolic frame is the notion that culture, is a big part of organizations, and it's sort of the informal glue that holds the organization together. So we talked about how, in contrast, something like the structural frame, which is very much focused on formal, explicit components of the organization, the symbolic frame focuses on the meaning that people derive from what happens within an organization. It's the interpretation and the meaning, and culture represents the extent to which that meaning is shared. There's some collective understanding of what this place is and what it means and what it represents, and what the organization exists to do and how we're all going to go about doing these things together. And so things like myths and stories and rituals and values become tremendously important. And so, again, I would refer you to Bowman Deal and our chapter on the symbolic frame to kind of dig a bit more into that. But today, what we're going to focus on, or in this recording, what I'm going to focus on, are the 6 rules for building and scaling culture. And this is from an author who is an entrepreneurial leader who published the article in Harvard Business Review, who's been very successful at building culture within his organizations. And so I'm just going to run through these 6 steps and make a few comments about each of them. So the first one that's recommended is to start with purpose. And in fact, on Monday's class on March 23rd, we're going to actually spend some time talking about a model for how to communicate purpose. So we'll dig into that more on the 23rd. But starting with purpose is the idea that we should try to understand the purpose of the organization from the inside out, from in terms of what is this organization, what does it represent. It should be about mission, not marketing. And what we mean by that is it's not about, culture is not about what we sell or even how we go about selling that stuff, but rather, why do we exist as an organization? Why should it matter? Why should it make any difference whatsoever? So really understanding that, well, again, we'll unpack that more tomorrow in class on the 23rd. But, really understanding that sense of purpose is really important because the culture is largely going to be the scaffolding that's built upon that sense of purpose, upon that foundation. So purpose, not product, mission, not marketing. And it's really important in terms of building an effective organizational culture that is going to both contribute to people's connection and engagement with the organization, but also with the organization's success. It's really important for that to be authentic. So it is not a marketing ploy. This is not marketing to our internal employees. This is about expressing who and what we are and truly having a deep sense of meaning and purpose. And so we'll have an opportunity, I'm sure, to talk about some examples of some very purpose-driven organizations. All right, the second rule is to define common language, values, and standards. So, part of that is that, by having common language, it reinforces the culture and the values, and it minimizes miscommunication. So, this is just not unusual at all in organizations that you'll see that there's certain language that likes to be, that an organization likes to employ. Doesn't mean that the language is entirely unique to the organization, but there is a shared language. There is a shared nomenclature. There are shared terms that are used to define certain kinds of things within an organization, right? And so that's just really important in terms of, making sure that when we are describing something, we're talking about the same thing. Those common values are really important because, in part, they endure beyond just the strategy or the products or services that the organization sells, but also because they guide. Values are the how. Values, in part, describe how we're going to engage with one another, with our customers. How are we going to go about making decisions? How are we going to go about approaching our work? And so values are just absolutely critical in doing that, right? I mean, values mean there's sort of a hierarchy that we're creating. We're saying that this means more to us than that, that we're specifying some finite set of priorities. And in this case, particularly as it relates to like codes of conduct or norms, or even in some ways goals that we should be trying to pursue. So if an organization says we value collaboration, what they're saying is we value this over that we value working together more than we do people trying to be superstar individual performers. If an organization says we value innovation, what they're saying is that they don't want to be an organization that is following trends. They want to be an organization that is setting trends. So they're saying that's important to us. So that is something that we are going to pursue. That is going to be a defining characteristic of how we go about approaching our work. We're going to approach it with a mindset and a lens of, say, innovation. And then standards, in part can be formal and informal. These can be things that are written into an employee handbook or a policy manual. They can also be these are things that can guide things like performance appraisals within an organization. So these are the standards that help evaluate that values-based behavior. So if we say we value collaboration, that's such a wonderful aspirational statement, but what does it mean? How are we going to evaluate it? What's the standard of collaboration that we're seeking to achieve within the organization? How do we evaluate people, individuals, teams, departments, leaders, and the entire organization as in terms of whether or not they are living up to our standard of collaboration, for example? And so a standard is typically going to have some kind of metric to it. It's going to be grounded. It's going to have some kind of anchor to it that allows us to say, this is an example of good collaboration. This is an example of a lack of collaboration. So language, values, and standards, to define those things clearly. This is essentially crystallizing, clarifying the target. What are we trying to do? How are we trying to do it? And then what are our means by which we're going to be evaluating whether or not we're hitting the target, whether we're being successful. So it just provides direction with regard to culture and interpersonal action and decision making and those sorts of things. Third, we have leading by example. So while in some ways we could argue that all organizational members have opportunities to be organizational ambassadors, they have opportunities to be champions, they have opportunities to be good representatives of the culture and the values, I think it's fair to say that leaders are uniquely positioned to express values and standards. I mean, as people who have responsibility and authority and power, they are oftentimes in that position where they may have more autonomy in terms of how they want to function or act. And so their discretionary behavior, their choices that they make in that regard can be really important in terms of expressing values. This is also where we so often see a say-do gap. It's the do what I say, not what I do. It's the we express one set of values, but we don't actually practice them. And that's where really good leaders, courageous leaders, virtuous leaders, leaders of high character really make a difference, because those are the people that will say, look, I'm principled. If we're stating that these are our core values and I believe in those, then I'm going to act in that way, even when it's inconvenient. So they're uniquely positioned. They provide social proof. So they also indicate and demonstrate to others that, hey, like you can thrive and be successful in this organization, let's say, by being collaborative, if that's one of our values. And I'm going to show you that. I'm going to demonstrate that. I'm going to show what that means, that I'm not always, working individually or independently, but rather I'm harnessing the input of others. I'm collaborating with my, colleagues who are other department heads, whatever it may be. And then it also conveys an authenticity of the mission, that this is not just marketing that's designed for external consumption, but rather we live out the values that we express. That's not just part of how we want to try to portray ourselves, maybe say to our customers or clients, but rather it's the way that we truly want to live internally within our organization. And so by leading by example and living out those core values as leaders, that really demonstrates authenticity both inside and outside the organization. All right, number 4 is to embrace your frontline cultural ambassadors. So this is the idea of like, you got to find those people who are really bought in, people who truly believe in what you're doing, and who love the organization and its mission, who are accountable to its values, and then we have to really support and encourage those people. So how are they being rewarded? How are they being incentivized and supported? Are we recognizing their cultural ambassadorship? Are we recognizing and publicly recognizing to others, hey, these people are doing it the right way, and that matters in organizations, whether they're small or large. We have to have those cultural ambassadors, right? And you can all probably think of examples of organizations like that, organizations where you can just tell that the people really believe in what they're doing, right? And are really bought in to what that culture is and what it represents. And that's good. And if you think about that from the human resource frame, those people are going to thrive. Those people are going to be happy. Those people are going to feel like there's a really good fit between them and the organization. And so in addition to thriving and being successful and being happy and being engaged, the organization's going to win as well. So we want to find those people and really support them. Number 5 is to seek, speak, and act with truth. And this is the idea of just really figuring out how to be authentic and transparent and open, right? So self-awareness is related to performance. We see that in organizations that have more self-aware people whose perceptions and evaluations of themselves align with how other people perceive them, tend to be more successful. Truth-seeking is necessary for fixing problems. You have to actually go in search of what's really happening inside the organization and truly understand it before you can, fix those problems, before you can solve problems, before you can improve what's happening inside the organization. So, some organizations don't want to do that. Some organizations are more interested in protecting their reputation, in protecting their brand, maintaining the coherency and continuity of their marketing efforts, that they're not willing to do that. And I think the organizations that are truly successful are those that are saying, let's take a hard look in the mirror at who we are and what we're doing. And let's be willing to confront those realities, even if they're unpleasant. In the long run, that's really valuable. Focus on contribution, not blame. So, if there are issues within the organization, the goal is not to figure out who to blame. The goal is to figure out what went wrong and how do we fix that moving forward. And then, utilize human resources. And again, that's lowercase h, lowercase r. So that just means leverage people, and their expertise and their perspective and their knowledge and their understanding of the organization. Everyone sits in a different seat, and as a result of that, where you sit determines where you stand. And so, really being mindful of that is important in terms of getting to the truth and really diagnosing accurately what's happening within an organization. If there are cultural deficiencies that have arisen over time, maybe slowly and almost imperceptibly within the organization, it's really important to be able to articulate what those issues are and confront those realities. All right, and then on the last one here, we have is the idea of being greedy with human capital, and then treat them right. And so the idea here is really spend a lot of time and energy ensuring that you've selected the right people, that you've found people. I mean, that is a worthy investment to make in most organizations. Now, I don't know about at the individual contributor level. I'm sure it differs greatly within organizations, but there's data that indicates that the cost of a bad hire in a leadership position usually costs an organization somewhere between 3 and 5 times the annual salary of the individual. So